Simon said, we're going to start off with a session on the impacts, really, and I'll kick off with some data. I'll try not to spend too long and really bring it to life. And then I'm going to hand to two of our community partners, Janpal Basran from Southall Community Alliance and John Blackmore from Action West London. And we're going to set the scene, really, and give a sense of the impacts, both from an economic data perspective, but also from a community sector and a sense of what people are experiencing, what residents are experiencing day to day. So I will kick off. I'll turn that off. Kofi, would you mind sharing the slides? Is that okay, Joanna? Is Kofi able to share the slides?
Yeah, I think so. I just
bear with me. Just collecting it now.
Okay, so I'll just, while Kofi's doing that, I will just say a little bit about the data and where it comes from and so on. So we've been working with the West London Alliance and the 7 boroughs in West London. Quite early on in the pandemic, we commissioned economic analysis from Oxford Economics. Since then, also, we've had an update on that, but also there's been a lot of detailed study on unemployment carried out by a company called Volterra, which gives us a lot of really good detailed evidence about the impacts on people and unemployment in particular. And within that, the groups that are being very badly impacted. This is incredibly helpful because it gives us a sense of how we might target programs. And yes, I think this hopefully will be a useful set of information. How's that going? I don't know, can other people see the slides, but I can't.
Not at the moment. How are we doing? Coffee?
Okay.
Coffee, how are we doing? Well, look, whilst we are having technical problems, I just wondered if we could pivot to Janpal Singh, and could you give your part of the presentation from? Oh, we have some.
Yeah, I think something's happening. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kofi. I'll be quick. So I think the important thing to say, if you wouldn't mind going to the first one, is economy sits within a West London economy, and one of the biggest factors to consider is the presence of Heathrow, the impact on the aviation sector, and the communities around Heathrow. Hugely important, not just for direct employment at Heathrow, but in supply chain employment. I think we have something like 8% of our workforce are employed directly at Heathrow. So just to give you a quick outline of some of the impact.
One second.
Okay.
The sound quality is not very good. Can I make sure that everybody is on mute if you're not speaking? Everybody put yourself on mute if you're not speaking. Okay.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon. So just very briefly, hugely important to consider Ealing within West London, the impact on aviation. If you just look at that figure, 60 million fewer passengers came through the airport last year. Hugely important also is the impact on hospitality, very, very important for Ealing and West London, and leisure. 120,000 people now unemployed in West London, and over 180,000 people on furlough, and that will finish in September. So again, we're looking at kind of increased risk for our unemployment. And if the next slide, please, Kofi. So then thinking about Ealing within that, and of all the areas in London, West London is the worst affected in terms of unemployment and wider impacts. And within West London, Ealing is worst impacted. That includes, we now have a figure of 30,700 people, residents on furlough, and our unemployment level has risen to 23,207. And that's a huge increase, and that will be impacting on our communities right across the board. If you could move to the next one, please, Kofi, or jump 2 ahead, actually, because I think I've done the third one. I've done the second one, and again, please, and just to give, and just moving on again, please. Just to give you a sense of where we sit in London now. So just moving on one, please. Yeah, so this puts us in a London picture, and as you can see, we are now second highest in London in terms of furlough. And our unemployment, sorry, our unemployment has, yeah, I think, shall I just talk to this one? I can see the Volterra, March 21. So that shows, okay, maybe just hold it on this one, and I'll say a few things about those that are hardest hit. Some people are coming out as really being very, very badly hit. Less likely to be furloughed. Oh, sorry, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to speak to my own set of slides here. Very badly impacted, less likely to be furloughed, and yes, one of the first groups, usually in a recession, to be let go. So big concerns about 16 to 24 age group. Also, we've got concerns, as Simon mentioned, about the over 50s. And in fact, analysts are saying that where they used to consider this scarring issue on young people, they're now really considering that could be a huge issue for over 50s, that many of them, if they don't receive the proper training in the right time, may never work again, or in this very competitive labour market. Ethnic minorities, there's emerging evidence now, ethnic minorities are experiencing higher unemployment rates, and this is administrative data from the Labour Force Survey. This is at a London level, so really urgent and important for us to understand the pattern of that. And within that, Black and Black British and Pakistani Bangladeshi groups being hardest hit, and that's evidence from March 2021. We also know that the fall in employment is 4 times higher for young Black people and nearly 3 times higher for young Asian people. So hugely important for us to consider that. I'll just say, before I hand to Janpal, I'll just say a few things about the way in which we're starting to see the recovery shaping up, and some risks, especially equalities risks in terms of that. So so analysts have started to look at where job postings are coming from and so on, and what level those jobs are. And we're starting to see that much of the unemployment has been driven by lower level jobs, and much of the recovery is starting to be driven by higher level jobs. And so in the sector, if you like, we're becoming very aware of that and realizing that it could, if we don't take action early and in a correct way, that it could really change the outlook for many people. And so we're predicting what's called a high skill recovery, especially in West London, and this impacts West London out of all London regions. They're predicting a high skills recovery, and as you can imagine, that could leave a lot of people who've been, if you like, mid redundant out of lower skill jobs, really in a bad situation. We also know that Heathrow has had a huge effect, but also local authorities are reporting new types of unemployed claimants. Many residents who have never been unemployed before, and they're particularly indicating a large number of ethnic minorities and older residents. Yes, I think that's all I would like to say, just by way of an introduction. And I think, okay, Simon, I'll hand to my
Thank you,
colleague.
Angela. Thank you for that canter through that with some technical problems. Janpal, can I ask you to introduce yourself, and can you give your thoughts on what we've just been shown?
Certainly, thank you, and I'm really grateful for being given the opportunity to talk today. So I'm Janpal Basran. I work for Southall Community Alliance, which is a charity working in Southall. I'm up today looking at the list as a Southall Jobs Partnership representative, but what I will do is I'll give an overview really of what I think is happening and why, and a bit like Angela, just talk about some headline risk factors.
Okay, Janpal, sorry to interrupt, but you might have to take your camera off too, because the sound isn't great.
Can you hear me a little better now?
That's much better. Okay,
yeah. So, the first thing is I'm going to be speaking about an area, one of the town centres in Ealing. So, what's so special about Southall? A unique place where a few of us come from and work. But I think in terms of economics, it's important to establish a baseline. And I'm looking at data from the indices of multiple deprivation. And even though the last lot of figures are from sort of 2015, they show that Southall wards, under 9 different indicators, Southall wards were top in 5 of the different forms of deprivation. So, we're looking at a town with an already very high level of poverty, socioeconomic deprivation, and challenges. Of course, then with the advent of COVID, what the community sector has found is that we've had to suspend all our normal forms of activity and go into emergency mode. So focusing upon sort of emergency food provision, medicine, community transport, and so on. There's been a corresponding huge increase in demand for the services, both of the voluntary sector and of the faith communities in Southall, who provided a direct response to help people with economic problems. So as trusted intermediaries, we've had to cope with the problems caused by working in a town which has a very significant, what we call digital divide. So there is already research which confirms what people know anyway, that you have a town with high levels of poverty, enormous diversity, and communities who really struggle to access services and information online in a world where everything is becoming more and more digitalized. This has an impact upon their health and well-being, and unfortunately Southall gained notoriety, I think, at some stage in the last 6 months regarding the very high levels of infection, COVID infections and deaths. So I think it gained a national focus, which was unfortunate. So, those are just a quick run through of what we've faced as a sector. But I think in terms of the agenda for today, I think there are a number of important risk factors that we need to consider that might make an already precarious situation a lot worse. Angela's already touched upon the disproportionate impact on Black and ethnic minority communities of the pandemic. And in particular, I hope it's accepted and acknowledged that there is very, very significant unemployment within Black, African, and Asian communities in the town. Southall has the highest levels of furlough rates, and also, I believe, the highest welfare claimant rates, according to the data. So, we have to be very, very careful, given that in September, there's the other big risk factor, which is the end of furlough schemes, and I think there could be an enormous local backlash, particularly as the town is so reliant upon Heathrow and its supply chain industries. And Heathrow, of course, isn't really, I don't think, showing the signs of large-scale recovery, which would provide us with any kind of further optimism. So I think that's a massive challenge, and I think that will be an important deadline for us, not just in Southall, but in West London. Other local factors include consideration, I think, of the high levels of in-work poverty, which are affecting our ethnic minority and migrant community residents. And what's actually happening, Simon, is that if you consider the holistic needs of families, we're seeing an increased reliance upon credit providers, pawnbrokers, payday loans, etc. And so people are becoming embroiled in a cycle of debt, poverty, and reliance. And I think we need to think of long-term solutions for that. And it may not be appropriate today, but I think there's a need for that. The fourth factor for me, I touched upon it, is around the problem around digital inclusion. Now, this is for a number of reasons. It could be that people lack the technical equipment, the kit, the technical skills to navigate the machinery and what's out there in terms of the sort of internet and so on, but also poor broadband connectivity. And this is really disadvantaging those communities. It's not just in Southall, but across Ealing, those communities in the poorer wards who are not able to keep a pace with residents living in some of the more affluent wards. So there's a disconnect immediately. And that disconnect isn't just one to do with economics and finance, it's to do with race and ethnicity. So it's the poorer, more recently arrived, or those residents who've been here for a while but are suffering from economic disadvantage. It's those people who are going to be worst hit. Fifth factor for us in Southall is space, places. I think there's austerity and combined with local asset management has led to a situation where we now lack the spaces and places and buildings where activities to train, to skill up, to provide guidance, to provide IAG, all of these sorts of things which form part of the normal economic recovery package take space. We do not have that. And in fact, in Southall, we've seen such an erosion of the physical infrastructure. We've seen our job centre close, we've seen our police station close, we've seen our one large community centre close, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're seeing a threat upon one of our young youth facilities called a young adult centre. So at the same time as Angela is saying, we're seeing a huge increase of young people becoming unemployed. We're seeing buildings where young people could be trained and skilled up vanishing. That can't be right. And that's to do with our local approach. That's not a national issue, it's a local issue. I will just mention one thing, if I may. I think it is a danger in disassociating ourselves with some of the wider factors which affect race inequality. And one of them, I think, is to do with our approach to regeneration generally. I think my view is that Ealing's approach to regeneration has been very much sort of what I call bricks and mortar driven. Pile them high, build them high, and somehow housing-led regeneration will work miracles. And I think that's wrong. I think there's not been enough of an investment in time and in money on considering the social impacts, the schools, the education, the green space, etc. And all of that's relevant today because in areas of increasing poverty, we're seeing an increase in high-rise, high-density development, which increases population, which increases pressure upon local resources and jobs particularly. Yet we're not seeing any measures being taken really at a strategic level in trying to alleviate those pressures. So I guess I've said enough. I'll stop there, I think, but I hope that's a kind of an overview.
Thank you very much. I mean, that is pretty in-depth, covering a lot of important areas. Can I now ask Dr. John Blackmore to come to the floor, introduce yourself. The floor is yours, Dr. John.
Okay, thanks. I've just switched it on so you can see me, etc. Obviously, I know a fair number of people, but not everyone. But if it's going to help in terms of the sound and everything, I'll switch it off now.
No, I think you're fine. Please.
Okay, fine. Well, first of all, I'd like to endorse everything that Janpal's just said. I know Janpal, I know Southall Community Alliance, I've known him for a long time. And there you've got the voice of experience, grassroots experience, which really need to be listened to. That point about regeneration, I 100% support. There's so much development going on in the borough. I'd like to see some of that community infrastructure levy money used to help the target group of people that this commission is actually looking at, and to see some direct connection between a company that's doing a massive regeneration project and some of that money flooding through to the people that really need the help and support that this commission is looking at. So I'd like to endorse that. I am an Ealing resident. I brought my family up in Ealing, and I've got a strong commitment to the borough. And I've worked in the borough for over 17 years, specifically on trying to address issues of employment skills for disadvantaged people, of which the highest proportion are from Black and ethnic minority communities. So I'm just going to say a little bit about Action West London, and then I've been asked to look at some of the impact of COVID on our organisation and the services. So just some background to Action West London. It was actually established 23 years. So we've been in Ealing, working with Ealing Council, other partners and disadvantaged people during good times and bad times. And when I mean bad times, I mean bad financial and economic pressure times. And unfortunately, they've been around for the last 10 or 12 years and have been exacerbated by COVID. You know, austerity was bad enough, but COVID on top of austerity has caused massive problems. However, we've tried to survive, and we have survived. We've expanded and contracted. Originally, we started as a single regeneration budget program for 5 years in Acton. It was called Action Acton, and we worked in the Acton area. The South Acton estate, which is obviously now renamed in quite a different estate, that's where we put a lot of time and attention and money into. The mission of the charity is changing the lives of unemployed, disadvantaged young people and adults by providing them with opportunities for employment, education, and enterprise. So everything we do to try and help disadvantaged people, those with the most barriers to employment, improve and change their lives through opportunities for employment training. And we do operate on a partnership approach. Over the years, we've worked with a wide range of organisations who are all interested in trying to support unemployed, disadvantaged people. We've expanded to cover a number of West London boroughs, and we work roughly with about 600 plus people every year. Ealing's our home borough, as we like to say it, and about 60% of the 600 people we work with are Ealing residents. And of all the people we work with, over 70% are from Black and ethnic minority communities. We'd like to increase the numbers of Ealing residents we support, but obviously that depends on opportunities and funding.
John, I'm sorry to push you along a little bit. I'm mindful about time.
Okay.
Give us that overview. Give us that overview of what you're seeing as the challenges right now.
Okay, all right. Well, the challenges are basically obviously financial. We've lost huge amount of money through COVID, and we're facing another big sort of loss of funding next year. That obviously affects the services we can provide, because without the funding, we can't deliver the services. So how's COVID impacted on the services? Because we can't deliver the range of support we would normally provide, we've also been badly affected by the fact that we're having to work remotely, because a key part of the work we do is actually engaging individually and in groups with people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds who are unemployed. So we've had to move everything online. So I think that's where Janpal's point about the digital exclusion. We found that as well with a lot of the people we work with. That is a big problem, actually working with them online. The impact it's having on residents is it's had a major issue in terms of poverty, in terms of their need for support on benefits issues and loss of income, obviously loss of jobs that we talked about, and picking up Angela's point about lower skilled jobs and people with lower skills being most adversely affected. That's basically what we found. And also those coming out of lockdown, the added problem is going to be competition, because those people with the least skills, with the most barriers and challenges to employment, are now going to be competing against people who've got a very good job record, but unfortunately have been made redundant. So in summary, there's a real sort of danger of a sort of large group of Ealing residents, particularly from Black and ethnic minority communities, being left behind. And that, I think, is going to be a major problem now and going into the future. So the sort of issues with barriers people face are language barriers. We work with people from refugees, mental health difficulties, discrimination in applying for jobs, and as I say, competition for more qualified people. One of the issues I'd like to raise is how is unemployment being covered in terms of funding and government contracts. Most of the funding comes from government-funded programs, which are generally led by large national companies. And the issue I'd want to raise there is, to what extent does any of that money trickle down to established organisations in Ealing who've got the real engagement with the target group of disadvantaged people? It's all too often that organisations will come in from outside, and I think there needs to be more sort of commitment really to working with local groups.
Thank you very much, John. I have one question before I want to go to the response, and that is, have you seen a greater need for your work, and is that greater need in the climate in which you have less resources to do what you do? Do you want to give us a sense?
Yeah, well, 100%. Basically, it's very, very difficult to get hold of resources. And as I said, we're the major contracts, and funding is payment by result contracts, and we deliver those as well as grant funded programs. And by the nature of those contracts, it doesn't allow the amount of time and attention that the most disadvantaged residents actually need, because the focus is on actually hitting the targets in order to get paid for the results. Now, I'm not saying that disadvantaged people in that, definitely they are supported, but there's a danger that they don't get the amount of time and support that's needed. So there's definitely been an increased demand and lower service support.
Thank you, John.
You're on mute as well now. Yeah.
Sorry to rush you.
No problem.
But you have given us a good overview, which sounds a little desperate. But I want to bring some of the others in. I want to bring in particular David Warnes, because I know he has to leave at 6, and so too does Puvi Patel. So can I bring them two in first? I'll ask Jason and the others to hold their fire, but I want to bring them two in first. If I could ask David. David wants to introduce himself to give 5 minutes, and then I'm going to ask Paul V, please.
Thank you, Simon. So my name is David Warnes. I'm the Deputy Principal at West London College, and as was mentioned earlier, I'm joined by colleagues Denise, our Head of Curriculum, and Callum, one of our board members as well tonight. Just to put a little bit of context in the college's position, obviously we have 2 campuses in the borough of Ealing. In total, in terms of our student population, we have 54% of our students who are Black and ethnic minority, and 59% of our staff as well. When you look specifically at our Ealing campuses, that increases to 64% at the Ealing Green campus and 94% at the Southall campus. So very significant numbers of non-white students, both adults and young people. Ealing predominantly, for those that don't know, is predominantly a more of a younger person campus, and Southall is more of an adult campus. But that does frame quite a lot of the work that we do as a college in terms of that, and we have a very strong active Quality and Diversity Committee, of which colleagues are involved in. We've just literally published in the last couple of months our Equality and Diversity annual report, which has gone to the board and approved, which really outlines what it is we're doing as a college around this particular agenda. And there are a number of things, and a lot of them have been talked about from Janpal and John as well, around that response to the COVID pandemic. I won't repeat what they've said, but just echo what they said around that digital poverty piece. That's a real concern for us, particularly these groups. We do analyse very carefully achievement gaps. In other words, are there any particular ethnic groups that are achieving more poorly than other comparable groups? That's something we do on an annual basis, and we monitor that, and obviously then identify any particular trends. For our entire student population, we do know that Black and Asian minority ethnic students do perform around 5% less than our white students. So that is obviously something that is of a concern to us as well, and something we are looking to address. We are active in the Ealing community, and Angela and I meet up quite regularly around different projects that we're working on, both in Southall and in Ealing as well. A number of them, I'll just mention a couple of them that are probably relevant to this group. We have worked very closely with Kerry Foods, New Foods, around language, and I think it was John that mentioned that language is often a barrier for progression in work, and that's specifically for those that are working at lower level jobs to improve their language skills, so they don't hit that ceiling and they can progress in their jobs and move out of low skilled, low wage jobs, that in work poverty piece. So that's a project that we've started with Noon, but we're hoping to expand that across other areas as well, across the borough. And we've done a number of sector-based work academies looking at a particular group. So we've just finished today, in fact, a Women into Construction programme that is specifically designed to increase the number of females that are working in the construction sector. This is our third cohort that we've done this year, phenomenal demand for that, and some great willingness for employers to then take these individuals on for jobs when they complete or when they achieve that particular training piece. So there are programs like that that are specifically targeting particular groups that are underrepresented or maybe disadvantaged in some way or another, and that's something that we obviously want to continue as well, and use this forum and use this the committee and the commission to help steer and inform that particular direction. So I think that's probably all I want to really say at the moment, just to give you a bit of context in terms of the work we're doing. Denise is very much at the front and centre of a lot of that work that the college does. But yeah, that's
Thank
probably...
you. Thank you, David. I will try and bring in other commissioners and public to ask questions before 6 o'clock if I'm given a chance. But I've got one question that I want to ask you, and that is, given the very big social determinants in which you have to work in, what have you found with your institutions that has been the greatest challenge? I mean, we've seen in education and on news almost on a daily basis, right? One, keeping them away and then getting them back, and then the COVID infections, all on your plate, all on your watch. One, how have you been personally? I'm sure the well-being piece for you and your staff and the students has been the highest priority. But what would you say have been some of the biggest challenges that a commission like ours that will report back to the council that we should have on our highest priority?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a tough year, obviously, for staff and for students equally. And as you say, it's been a constant change, and we're having to respond very quickly to short notice changes in policy, etc. But we have some very resilient staff and some very resilient students, and we've done quite a lot of surveying of students over the past year in terms of how they're coping with that. We've identified obviously issues around mental health and well-being. There is a national survey that the Association of Colleges have done where they ask students, did they feel as if they've been disadvantaged over this last year, and whether they've fallen behind, and 70% of students agreed that they had fallen behind with their work. So there is additional money from the government to resource what they call in education recovery, or catch up effectively. So I think my question really was we're at the moment now where we're planning how can we best use that resource, what can we do to really enhance the learning for these students that do need that catch up and that recovery. What are the things? And we're looking at things like mentoring and coaching and things like that. So, if there are community groups or individuals that are looking to get involved to mentor one-on-one with students or coach students, then that would be a real bonus, because that's one of the streams that we're looking at to really enhance that journey for students.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be a few questions from the fellow commissioners and all the public. But I now want to turn to Horvik. Sorry if my pronunciation's been bad, please correct me. But thank you for taking time out. Could you introduce yourself, pronounce your name as you want us to call you, and then tell us your view on what you're dealing with? Because, you know, in many ways, both you and David are on the front line in different spaces, and dealing with an awful lot. And so I can't thank you enough for taking time out. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to come along and speak. So I'm Purvi Patel, and I'm the Head of Education, Employment and Skills at Heathrow. And in my remit is specifically the Heathrow Employment and Skills Academy, which I've been asked to give you a little bit of an update on in terms of what we're doing. So for those of you not familiar, Heathrow Airport set up a Employment and Skills Academy back in 2004. And it was set up really to support residents that are local to Heathrow to find jobs and careers at the airport, with a range of different employers across multiple sectors. And we refer to those group of employers as Team Heathrow. And that Team Heathrow will be your airlines, any sort of companies associated with the airline industry, so your baggage operations, your ground handling agents. We then have logistics and cargo, we have construction, retail, hospitality, a whole range of different sectors that operate here. I think if you can think of any job, that's probably one available at the airport. And with the Heathrow Academy, our door really is open to anyone that wants to work at the airport, but we do proactively focus on people who are facing those additional barriers to finding employment. And that might be because they've come from a homeless background, they may be a care leaver, or a minority background, have a disability. So we do tend to want to support people that do have those additional barriers. And what we do is run a pre-employment training program to help people to get those essential employability skills and introduce them to what it would be like to work at the airport. And then we broker candidates into the live vacancies at the airport. Now, as a result of the global pandemic, as we've all been talking about today, and the impact on our business, employment for many people has, of course, been affected. Now, I know we're talking specifically about, you know, minority groups and what might be the impact there, but I would probably say that the effect of the pandemic on employment has been felt across all demographic groups at the airport. So regardless of background and age, I think we've seen a real impact everywhere and across all of the sectors that do also operate at the airport. What we've done to try and maintain support for the local community is throughout 2020, we continue to run the pre-employment training programme so that people did get the skills that they needed and to transition into alternative employment. So we were helping candidates to find alternative training opportunities and employment, working with organisations like the NHS when they had their mass vaccination programme. There was a Green Skills Initiative, which was targeting Heathrow to consider a role in the film industry. We also worked with HS2 to target their supply chain in particular so that we could keep our apprentices employed on our shared apprenticeship scheme for construction. And we have about 40 apprentices in learning that we've maintained the commitment to support from levels 2 to 4. So there's some of the sort of actions just to keep things moving and the support for the community. In terms of the effect around redundancies, I think the first thing to say is that all employers at the airport have done their best to really maximise the opportunities of the job retention scheme, and that really is to protect as many jobs as they possibly could. And we do still have colleagues on furlough. In October 2021, we then partnered with the DWP and we set up a dedicated Heathrow Job Centre Plus service to help colleagues across Team Heathrow that were facing redundancies and that were already made redundant. We now have a dedicated outplacement support service through the Academy where we're supporting candidates with advice and guidance on CVs, preparing a job interview and navigating the job market. Now, some of the challenges that we're hearing from the candidates that are using the Heathrow Academy is that where they lack some particular skills around digital literacy and English language being their first, if English language is their second language, then we are receiving feedback that they're finding particular challenges, and JCP have actually highlighted that to us, that many roles of work from home means that it's very difficult for them to engage in work because of the language barriers and the digital skills barriers. But the feedback that we're getting directly from the candidates is that there are so many jobs out there, they're almost feeling like they're sort of putting some pressure on themselves and barriers, that they're seeing that there's a volume of applicants and they may not get that opportunity. So there is also that lack of confidence in their ability as well that they're talking to us about. It's taking several applications before interview are offered, and when they are offered, sometimes the feedback that they get is not necessarily constructive to help them with their next stages. So that's been a difficulty. And some of the candidates have said to us that they struggle to articulate their experience confidently. And I think this is a big challenge where in an airport environment, we have a lot of people who have worked there for 20 years, 30 years. They've only ever worked in an airport environment. And within that airport environment, they may have only worked in catering or in retail and so on. And now they're struggling to think, well, actually, where else may I go? That association of transferring their skills is actually something that they're finding is a barrier for themselves. So that articulation of experience is a big one. And also it's the sort of the networks, the lack of networks is other feedback that we've also had, is that lack of social capital that we know we do find disadvantaged communities often lack. So that is another area that they focus on.
Thank you for that for the moment. I know we've only got you for 7 or 8 minutes. So I want to ask either the commissioners, it might be quicker just to raise your hand if you've got a question. And Joanna, if there's anything from the public that I can't see that you can draw to my attention, and we can ask our 2 guests before they have to leave. Hopefully I can chain them to their chair for another few minutes over the 6 o'clock. But let's get some questions from our commissioners, please. Denise, floor is yours.
Thank you. So David knows I've already had this conversation with him. So when I was doing my curriculum planning, I asked the question of why does the college not allow rooms to be hired out or given to free for local charities? So already Janpal has said about not having the space. There's a lack of space for training and upskilling people in the local area. Now, West London College has 4 or 5 different campuses and we have rooms. Why can we not team up with some of these local projects where they need space so that we can then, it's a solution rather than a question and a solution.
Right.
So.
That's a very, very good question. Hold that thought. Let me take some more questions and then we can do them together. I can see Mohan, your hands up, please. And Mohan's putting this question, put up your hand. So I'm going to take 3 at a time. Who will be after Mohan? The floor is yours, Mohan.
Just a question to Puri Patel. In terms of the gap on job readiness and acceptance, what kind of sort of figures are coming up? Because I recall from the days of West London Tech and Enterprise, I mean, our provision is more fragmented now because that brought so many things together under one roof, and we don't have that kind of agency. And it also did some pretty decent economic analysis of the whole West London region at the time. So in terms of building a picture, what is the situation in terms of the people you're putting forward and how the employers perceive them? Is there any good data on what percentage are perceived to be job ready, or in terms of other skills, in terms of articulation at interviews, etc., etc.? Is there a picture of it?
Hold that thought for a second. Last question from Nikki. Nikki Flash, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My question is for Purvi. My question is, in terms of people who are struggling with their skills, who need to be reskilled, what would you suggest? What do you think the solution is? What could be done for those people?
Great. So 2 questions for Purvi, and let's go to David first on the space. You heard from a number of
people.
And
Denise and I had this conversation. I think it's a valid point. We do have, we have 4 campuses. We have 2 in Ealing. They are not fully utilised, and we do have that space that should be used in the community. We are a community asset. So the whole definition of that is that it does benefit the wider community. We do have a charity discount on our rate, but it's probably not sufficient, but we do flex that. In fact, Denise, you probably don't know, but this week we did a 6% discount on our charity that we use in our Hammersmith campus this week. So we do have that flex, and I think if anyone is interested in having that conversation, I'm quite happy to engage with them on that.
Given the emergency that we're in, unprecedented times, would it be unreasonable for you and others to think about how we just cover the costs? Would that be an option?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, there are costs because we do have security and cleaning. They're probably the main two costs. So as long as we can cover those costs, I think we are open to that discussion and that negotiation.
Thank you, David. Does that answer your question, Denise? Good. Purvi, you've got two questions there. Could you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Them?
Yeah, just on the one about the skills, those that are struggling with skills and what we should be doing or are doing. I think it's fair to say, and you know, obviously David is on the line. Heathrow does have a very good partnership with our local colleges, and West London Colleges is obviously one of those partners. And what we are doing is we are referring people that are former colleagues of Heathrow or at risk at the moment to the pre-employment training and other reskilling and upskilling courses that our colleges are running. So we're making sure that they are aware that there is this support available. And we also, we're working with Skills Builder. I don't know how many of you know about Skills Builder, but they have got a framework around essential skills learning. So we are using that framework to support our candidates, which is designed to help them understand where their skills are, where their gaps might be, and helping them to understand how they may be able to fill those gaps through some of the skills, through some of the courses that the colleges are running. So there's those two areas there. In terms of the data, I was asked about, you know, sort of some of the data. We don't have the data from Job Centre Plus yet in terms of how many people from Heathrow are coming through that are requiring specific skill support. They've anecdotally have shared with us that Eastern digital literacy is the main one that they're finding the challenges with.
Thank you very much. This is the last round because I know that our guests have to go. I've got Edmund Yeo, so you start, and if anybody else wants to come in, then I'll take it before our two guests have to go, and then we'll continue with part two.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief, and I just want to say that whilst our previous two speakers seem to understand very clearly the disadvantaged position of the ethnic minorities, what affirmative steps are they taking to ensure that, especially people from my community, which I'm aware of, you know, are really struggling with jobs and with even with the interviews that they can't get through? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the other Edmund, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. My question is quite similar to what Edmund has just asked. And I just want to ask from Purvi, in view of the very stark data that we have received about the impact of unemployment in Ealing and particularly in the minority communities, what are you doing in terms of that project that you have to adapt towards absorbing people, particularly in this community going forward?
Thank you. And before you answer, Joanna, is there any questions pertinent to our last two guests that we can take from you? Joanna Summer?
There was a question that was similar to Denise's one about kind of the cost of kind of room hire for kind of childcare. I think it's kind of been dealt with through that other question.
All right. Okay. Last two questions for our guests. Purvi, you first, please.
Yeah, I think it's the main action we're taking is to help candidates that are using the academy to be as job ready as possible and to help them understand their transferable skills. So we actually have a team, well, we have a colleague who supports them with their CV, but does mock interviews with them, give them a real opportunity to put them into a bit of a real life situation. And that actually works quite well. And because they're not jobs at Heathrow at the moment, it's difficult to know what those outcomes are. Once they leave, we don't have sight of those things. But historically, when we have vacancies at the airport, we have over 80% interview to offer rate, because the offer that what we give candidates is the job readiness training. So getting their CV ready, really supporting them with their mock interviews and helping them to understand and articulate the skills they've got. We are now starting to see some vacancies come through. So we are still taking that approach because we know it's worked in the past. So that's the main area. And the other one really, as I mentioned before, is just to make sure that people are connected into the local colleges for the upskilling and the reskilling. That's the main action that we can take at the moment while we don't have those employment opportunities.
Do you envisage, as was said by Janpal, there might be a skills gap with this demand for highly skilled,
Yeah,
in
possibly.
comparison to those that are losing the jobs who are lower skilled.
Yeah. So I guess one of the trends that we were seeing before the current situation is that, you know, all businesses have been bringing in new technologies at quite a pace. That probably has increased in pace in the last year because employers are having to find more efficiencies. And so process-wise, there's been a lot more automation, and therefore there is an impact on some of the skills. I could give you an example of each of the terminals that you first. Terminals 2 and Terminal 5 are new terminals and have a lot more tech-based operational roles, whereas in Terminal 3 and Terminal 4, perhaps because they're older terminals, not so much of the new technologies. When we closed those two terminals because of the current situation, it was difficult for them, the colleagues in those terminals across Team Heathrow, to transfer into Terminal 2 and 5 because they didn't have the skills to use the new technology. So there's been a gap in that. So the digital piece is really coming out quite strongly as an area that does need to be a focus.
Got it. Okay. David, last word to you on this section.
Yeah, I mean, very much similar to Purvi, and Purvi and I work very closely together around that piece and that referral mechanism. It works really well, not just with West London College, but the whole ecosystem of providers in West London. But you know, it is, in answer to Edmund's question, it is very targeted approach, and the programs that we have, like the Noon Foods, for example, where we are working with individuals on their language skills in particular, because we've recognised and that is a barrier to them progressing. Not just getting into work, but also then progressing once they're in work as well into higher paid employment. So it's programs like that that are very bespoke and very tailored to an individual's needs. I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to any of this.
Okay. Well, can I thank you both? I'm going to move to our next guest now.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And if I can just say, David, before you fly off, that this is an ongoing conversation, and if you are amicable, we may come back to you again because it's that ongoing conversation, finding shared solutions that we're looking at with this commission.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I can't see you anymore, Purvi, but thank you very much for joining us. We need to thank you. Thank you for your time, Purvi. It's important, and we may continue this conversation with you over our week's findings, but at this stage, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
All right, can I go back now to Jason and John? Thank you for staying with us on this. We really appreciate it, but I want to ask some of our other guests now, in particular Jason Knight, and then Harpreet and Percy. So Jason first, who is also part of the Heathrow, but I wanted to get the questions to Purvi and David before they had to leave.
I totally understand. Thank you very much for having me. I'm turned off my camera because I think reception started to fail me. So I thought I'd turn off my camera, and hopefully you can all hear me clearly. So my name is Jason Knight, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Director with accountability for Heathrow's Learning and Development Proposition, ownership of the ED&I agenda, and hold the armband for Heathrow Skill Education and Recruitment Partnership via Heathrow Academy. So I work very closely with Purvi. Purvi is one of my line reports. And I think some of this was touched on, but I think prior to COVID-19, Heathrow, as we know, was a bustling hub welcoming over 80 million passengers per year. However, with the borders effectively being closed, aviation has been one of the worst sectors impacted by COVID. Now in 2020, we saw our passenger numbers collapse to 20 million, more than half of whom travelled in January and February, and saw an overall revenue footfall of around 60%. Now, traditionally, airports have very high fixed costs, but due to the immediate drop in passenger demand, we had to act swiftly, making some tough decisions, whilst at the same time trying to keep our core values in mind. So some of the interventions that we did make included a restructuring program designed to streamline the organisation in response to the drop in passenger demand. And although there were some compulsory redundancies, I can say with confidence that throughout the process, we did not make any compulsory redundancies for junior levels across the operation. Instead, they were offered the opportunity to leave through voluntary severance, and if not, then they would not need to leave. So no voluntary redundancy, mandatory redundancies were made. We also had a tiered salary sacrifice kind of set up where everyone across the business took a pay cut, the highest paid seeing the largest percentage in pay reduction. And then obviously our furlough scheme, where we would rotate time off for all colleagues where possible, and where required, we would top up the lowest paid colleagues above the government's 80% commitment. Now, as hard as we tried, job losses across Heathrow and the wider Team Heathrow were inevitable. And it's estimated that across the campus, or Team Heathrow, as Paul kind of touched on, there was a 40% reduction in headcount. So from our once kind of community of around 76,000 people, we dropped to around 40,000 people. And with reports of almost half of the jobs coming from people in the local community. So around 17,000 people came from the local community. And you know, that's some of the estimates that we've got. Now, we know that almost 40% of Heathrow's local community is made up of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups, and therefore these groups stand a chance of being disproportionately impacted by these job losses. So we're working with both Heathrow Academy and Team Heathrow to drive a community-first agenda, aligning our partners and stakeholders behind the ambition of focusing on the recruitment of local people as a priority as demand returns and we start to build back. We're also committed to continue to support and fund local charities through Heathrow Community Trust, with recent funds focusing on charities that were targeted on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. And more recently, we've committed 25% of our apprenticeship levy to support charities in the local community. And the intention is to maintain that as we grow back. So in addition to our external commitments, internally, we've made a number of, we've remained focused on our D&I agenda throughout the pandemic, including the targeted protection of underrepresented groups when creating our new structure, and setting out initiatives to drive representation of minority ethnic colleagues to more senior positions across the organisation. Now, Heathrow has a strong foundation to build on, with 40% of our colleagues coming from 46% of our colleagues, in fact, come from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. However, they are in the lowest paid roles. So some of the things that we're doing to really change this and deliver that kind of piece around more senior representation. One, we're carrying out targeted D&I talent succession planning sessions to map out opportunities for progression as we build back. Two, we're unlocking capability through targeted mentor schemes, internships, graduate schemes, and apprenticeships. And finally, really working closely with the diversity networks to amplify their voices and hone in on what matters the most, and to help us kind of shape the future agenda around ED&I as we build back.
Jason, thank you for that. I mean, there's a myriad of questions that
I bet
you could unleash. I mean, you know, you've lost 30,000 people. Where have they gone? What have you know? What? And you also lay bare the uncomfortable truth that even before the pandemic, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people in senior levels were scarcer than we probably like, and so there might be questions about, does this give you an opportunity to reset differently?
Exactly.
In that space, but let's hold fire with all of that. And if I could bring in Percy, thank you for your patience, and can you introduce yourself and give your insight from a countryside properties perspective?
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you. And firstly, you know, this big thank you to being invited to attend this evening. And, you know, from Countryside's perspective, we're welcome to being involved in future workshops and events to, you know, work on this issue and drive this forward. You know, we recognise the importance of this agenda. So, a bit of a background. My name's Percy Malani. I'm Development Director for Countryside, West London, Thames Valley. We've got a presence in Ealing. Our head office is based on Ealing Broadway. And the key project that we're involved with in partnership with Ealing is the regeneration of the South Acton estate, branded as Acton Gardens, as people might be aware. But so we've got a huge amount of investment in the borough. not just in South Acton, but we've also just started a new site in conjunction with Located, part of the Department for Education, which is the Arc-Zone Academy just to the south of Acton, Acton High Street. So, we've got a big presence here. But I think from the perspective of Countryside, and for those people that don't know Countryside, we're one of the large PLC house builders. Countryside Properties is a slightly different myriad of that, where we partner with local authorities and with registered housing providers to deliver quite often regeneration schemes, and that's the focus of my work with the South Acton estate. I think from the perspective, and it's sort of it's disheartening to hear from some of our partners in the wider area about the issues they've had. And I'll be completely frank, the house building industry, out of many of the industries in the UK in the last year, has been the least affected and actually has probably recovered quicker than most. That is in part because of the underlying issue of housing supply in the UK, but then actually we've had huge support from the government in the way of stamp duty reductions, new mortgage offers, you name it. And then to back that up as well, the government actively encouraged house builders to carry on constructing through the pandemic, which obviously caused quite a lot of issues in relation to public perception. But I think, if we're honest, the government didn't want a repeat of what happened after 2008 and housing supply and delivery falling off a cliff. So that said, we did have disruption. We closed the sites for all of our sites across our business for 8 weeks. And then we gradually reopened the sites once we knew that we had COVID secure measures in place. So I think we ended up back probably about 6 months after the initial lockdown. We got up to about 60% capacity. We're now operating at 90% on site. So, we're better than most. And I think where we are now, and I think the recognition of where we sat last year, is that we actually committed to £1 million fund last year to spend on local groups, grants, projects to try and help people. And then there was actually a further £1 million committed to in the October 2020 that's still running through now. We've continued to support local groups in Acton and Ealing in and around our sites. We know how important they are, and this ranges from food banks, educational facilities, home growing kits, that kind of thing. And then I think what we noticed, not least of all with our local residents, but also our staff, some of the growing issues with mental health and just from people's isolation. So there's been a lot of support around that. I think the question then is, what are we doing in relation to race and equality? And I think I'll start off by saying we could do more. The industry is not performing quite where it should be from a diversity inclusion perspective, and I know there's a lot of work going across with all of our competitors to address that, but we can do more. What we are doing at the moment, specifically at Countryside and then countrywide across our entire business, we are introducing a diversity inclusion policy that's launching in the next few months that will help address this issue. We are doing well in some areas. So our graduate intake has actually got a third of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic background. So it's, we're doing quite well on that front, but we do recognise there are wider issues. So we've also launched a wider sustainability approach, and that's got commitments in there. One of which is to try and have our local workforce reflect the demographics of our local communities that we work in, because there is a disconnect there at the moment. So that's one of the commitments that's contained within that report. And I think one of the other local initiatives that we're looking at, we are in the process of becoming a partner with the Black professionals in construction and also women in construction that we heard from the college previously in terms of their cohorts that are working through that. So we've got a commitment to that. We also are supporting local businesses through the South Acton Business Improvement District, and that's working with them to really try and drive local businesses that are operated by local people to improve the environment, footfall, and ultimately their sustainability. And then I think we're also working with Action West London to try and get more involved with some of their programs that are local in Acton, about what we can do to assist with people getting into the construction industry at all levels, and having more visibility about the opportunities that there are available, not just in our business, but then across some of the other parts of our sector.
Thank you very much. I was just calling my son, put myself on mute to say somebody was at the door.
That's all right, no problem.
Percy, thank you for that. I'm going to bring in Harpit, but I mean, again, we could have a whole session just with you on some of those aspects. I mean, instinctively, it seems to me that you're probably playing catch up in regards to looking at your workforce and the local workforce. To be honest, but it sounds like you might be putting your foot on the gas now, having recognized the challenge. And I think some of the commissioners may want to unpick that a little bit. We're not putting you on the rack, but we do want an honest conversation, because that way everybody wins. Pitu, you're the chair of the Royal Business
Park Royal Business Group.
Park Royal and its owner. Thank you very much for taking time out. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Lord Woolley, commissioners, members, thank you for the opportunity. It has been a really informative session for myself, because Heathrow is a strategic partner for West London Business, Park Royal Business Group, and Park Royal West London Business represents some 100,000 businesses in the region. This hasn't come under my nose or in my radar, that the employment issues, the ethnic race issues which surround Heathrow, and I've heard about today. So I would like to take this back to the board at West London Business, to say that, if Ealing represents 8% of Heathrow's workforce, and there are the key issues which have been aired today, really West London Business should be flying the flag along with the commission here, and have a plan going forward where it's being actively pushed and progressed. And I noticed David from Ealing College, Ealing University, West London University was speaking earlier, and David is a fellow board member at Park Royal Business Group. So I think we do need to take some of these questions which were raised today back to West London Business, and Heathrow already being our strategic partner, we can channel these concerns a little more actively, I think, and directly get to the root as well.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there's any more you want to add, but I mean, first of all, thank you for your willingness to acknowledge that you're part of the Ealing family.
Absolutely. Lord Woolley, I've been a resident in Ealing myself since 1979. And so I've seen Ealing go through changes. I work with a few local bodies within Ealing as well. And it's amazing, and it's good to hear how Percy was talking about their projects as well, and to see the area develop and come up. And we've seen Ealing go through a major change, and it will be a major hub now once Crossrail opens up, hopefully in the new year.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a deluge of questions for you too. We might have to stay here until 10 o'clock at night.
Thank you for the opportunity. But I'm not going to talk about my business, because I think that the commission concerns more important areas, and I think it's related to Park Royal Business Group and West London Business. So we'll steer with that.
Well, I think that the commission will be interested in how we join the dots and so a golden thread with all concerned. But now I want to bring in our chief executive. Paul, are you there? Can I say that I met Paul some months ago, and we've become friends in friends in this challenge, let me say. And he's been a great advocate for what we're doing. So you're in that bird's eye view, if you like. I guess you've got a bird's eye view, but then I guess you're in the trenches too. So tell us what it's like from in the trenches and on the bird's eye view.
Thank you, Simon. I'll do my best. I'll also try and be as brief as I can be, because I think hearing from the commissioners is important. Firstly, can I say a huge thank you, Simon, to you, Councillor Camady Rothwell, and all the commissioners for your leadership on this issue. It's hugely significant. I should start by saying, I'm sure people on the call are aware we've had a change of leadership at the local authority in the last couple of weeks. So can I just put on my record my thanks to Councillor Bell and his administration for his work in this area, and also a huge welcome to Councillor Peter Mason, new leader, and our new administration. There's much to build on. And we've got some new direction as well, and new emphases. I'm really pleased that our new administration, our new leaders, set out economic recovery, jobs and incomes, greener Ealing and greening and environmental recovery, and inequality and poverty as the 3 priorities for the council. And I think they speak incredibly well to tonight's conversation. So, and also I know our administration are very committed to engagement of our diverse communities. So really good context for the discussion. If I might, Simon, I'd like to say one word really about the council as an employer, but then just broaden out a little bit into the wider economy of Ealing. So. As a council, we employ nearly 3,000 people directly. Half of those employees are from different Black communities, and more than half of them live in Ealing. And obviously, we've endeavoured to do 2 things in the pandemic. One is to protect their safety and their well-being. And the second is to protect their employment. Because we know, apart from the social justice of that commitment, it's also an investment in Ealing, if we can protect that employment and protect people's well-being. So that's been a really important focus for the council during that period. Just thinking about the borough, absolutely, this is the central question: economic recovery and its interaction with inequality and poverty. That's absolutely the central question of the day. So the Commission is just so incredibly timely. A few reflections. The first thing is a little bit about what we are doing, and then a bit on what we will do and we hope to do with our communities and with our partners. So we've channeled in total, commissioners, over £230 million of support into local business over the course of the pandemic. 130 million of that also is channeling various grants to support businesses that have been affected by COVID and to protect employment in those businesses. And we've made 103 million available through business rate relief as a local authority as well. So nearly £250 million of investment in our economy to try and sustain viable businesses, so we've got people ready on the other end of the pandemic to emerge from this terrible experience that our community has faced. We've also worked hard where we can to use the investment we're making in the pandemic to support local employment. Perhaps I can give you 2 examples, commissioners. One is, we've had to do lots and lots of testing of people in the local area, in common with much of the country, and we've tried to target, and that's involved quite a lot of jobs, actually, quite a lot of job creation. So we've targeted the delivery of that testing through local companies who had the skills we felt they needed to do that work, and we've really pushed on local employment in those contracts. The second thing I would say, and here's a shout out to the NHS as well, wonderful NHS partners. We've worked in West London and in Ealing with the NHS on the delivery of the vaccine programme to make sure that all the volunteering and employment opportunities in the vaccine programme have been targeted wherever possible on our diverse local residents. And across those 2 initiatives, commissioners, there are literally hundreds of jobs that we've been able to secure for local residents through that work, and the associated training that goes with that employment. Just to move on to a couple of other areas, the council, I know regeneration is a topic of controversy and debate, which is absolutely reasonable. I would say that during the pandemic, the council's investing £400 million in the building of genuinely affordable homes. And wherever possible, and much of that is going through a council-owned company that develops those properties. And again, wherever possible, we're seeking the construction work that goes into those genuinely affordable properties to be local wherever we possibly can. So that's a big capital investment in our communities as well, Simon. Looking ahead, I would say that there are a whole plethora of initiatives and schemes launched by central government that we are trying to channel and mobilise in the interests of the local population and the interests of tackling inequality and poverty. I won't name them all because they're a bewildering series of acronyms, Simon, but they're in the space of skills, they're in the space of supporting people into employment in disadvantaged groups, and there are literally tens of millions of pounds available, possibly more, that we're able to draw down into Ealing. Some people may have heard of Kickstart, which is a scheme for young people, and there are various employment programs for people who've lost their roles in the pandemic. So all of that money is being channeled locally to support local people through our job brokerage schemes, etc. And we are not only setting targets and monitoring overall impact on getting people into work, we are also targeting inequality groups, Black and minority ethnic inequality groups, for that employment as well. So it's not good enough for us just to have local employment, although that's crucial. We need to make sure that local employment is in our most diverse and disproportionately affected sectors.
I'll ask you to hold on there because I've got one more guest and I want to give the public and the commissioners time for lots of questions, but that is a good canter and lots to mull over. Now, my last guest, thank you for your patience. Sarah, I can't see you on my board. Now I can. Again, thank you for your patience. Can you introduce yourself and tell us how the world is during this turbulent year from your position?
So thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm Sarah Rushton. I'm one of the executive directors of West London NHS Trust. So we deliver the community and the mental health services in the borough of Ealing. I wasn't quite sure what to prepare and what to expect. So if it's not relevant, please tell me and I'll try and keep it on track. So I suppose I've got two aspects to what I had to say, one about the people who use our services and one about us as an employer and as a anchor institution. So our service users, over 50% of our service users are from an ethnic minority background. So it is really important that we make sure that people have equal access to our services. I'm going to touch on the employment aspect first, because if you have a serious mental illness, your rate of employment in Ealing is 9.5% as a working aged adult. That is shocking. And so there is a long way to go for anybody with a serious mental illness in gaining employment, including the people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So internally within the trust, we're doing a lot of work. More money is coming down through the long-term plan. So we are doing work on individual placement and support, which is the most proven way of getting someone with mental ill health back into the workforce. And that helps people get job ready, but also supports them through the first few months of their employment, trying to keep people in the workforce. The other thing to say about service users and access is we know that if you are disadvantaged from a Black and ethnic minority group, you have poorer access to health services and to mental health services included. So this year we have started a new project called the Ethnicity in Mental Health Improvement Project. And the objective of that is to reduce the ethnic inequalities to access, experience and outcome of mental health care. And in working through this project, we've started to make much better connections with the local voluntary sector networks, and to start to look at whether we can use some of the funding that comes down, perhaps through grant processes, to get those local community organisations who understand their populations to work with us to deliver perhaps lower level mental health support, less stigmatizing ways of people to access our services. Because if we can catch people earlier, then we won't end up with those statistics where you know, young Black men are the ones that are disproportionately affected in the inpatient mental health system. Our workforce, we do see ourselves as an anchor institution, so we want to have a culturally relevant workforce and to be a fair and inclusive workforce. Our workforce is representative of the communities we serve. We still have a bit more to do in the senior roles, but by and large, we've done well with that. And we do have schemes going with Job Centre Plus in order to bring people in on entry level jobs. The irony for us is we have a massive skills shortage in nursing. We have a large numbers of vacancies. It can be between 25 and 30% in some teams vacant, and we cannot recruit those people. We are starting to offer apprenticeships where healthcare assistants can do their training, but there isn't enough of that. And I do have to say that the national decision to stop the grants for nursing, I think, has really impacted on people coming through and getting that those skills and training. I'll probably stop there, but I'm happy if anyone wants to ask me any questions.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Again, there's so much there. I'm sure people want to ask you about COVID hesitancy and how your workforce is managing that, or even drilling down to what your senior manager looks like. And
yeah, and COVID hesitancy within our staff, we have done brilliantly well with our Black and ethnic minority staff. So they have taken up the rates in a very similar way to the rest of the workforce. We had some specific areas, but they were around misinformation about things like pregnancy rather than being related to cultural background.
Good. Okay. Well, look, first of all, Tan, can you come on, please, and tell us about what the public are asking our guests? So that will be first. And whilst we're looking at that, can I ask commissioners to raise their hand? And I can see everybody here, so I can see your hands when they're raised. And we can have we've got about 40 minutes or so if I can chain our guests to their desks for a little bit longer. But this is a very, very rich discussion, and we have a number of people right at the front line of some of the biggest challenges. So we've got a question from the public in terms of youth advocacy, and what do we do for, I don't know, I've just lost it. What do we do for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic mental health through the impact of young people during COVID and prepare them for the jobs market? Advocacy, young people. I heard from one of our contributors that said that the only community centre in Southall was closing or was closed. I mean, is that for real? Does that make any sense to anybody? So let's just look upon that, because I know Percy's given more than £1 million. and Paul may have something to say about this, and John, why isn't there youth provisions in these key areas? Paul?
Well, I mean, one answer is that there's cuts, basically. Local authority have had to make cuts in all sorts of services. Central government making cuts. I mean, this was austerity before COVID. COVID's made it even more of a problem. And I always think there's, on the one hand, there's always this concern expressed about young people, the problems they're causing, all the difficulties, and at the same time, all the resources are being cut for them. So it's financial, and it's very damaging. I mean,
what does it mean in real terms, John? What does it mean in
what it means in real terms is that young people,
when there's no community centre for young people to go to?
It means that they don't get their help and support that they thought, you know, they would be able, they would be able to get if that centre was open. Where else do they go to get that? I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, there are different projects scattered around, but if there's a particular centre that's there to help young people, then those young people are going to miss out when that centre is closed. Especially, I mean, is there any other provision being planned to replace that centre? I don't know on that. I don't hear that there is.
Percy, you're bringing some local money into the locality. I know £1 million sounds a lot. When you're looking at buildings and then staff for the long term, it doesn't go far, does it? I mean,
no,
how do you see your role in this local provision space?
Well, I would add that £1 million isn't just, unfortunately, isn't just targeted for Ealing, but I think the key thing is at South Acton.
So how much is targeted for Ealing?
For specific, I couldn't give you a specific number on that. Apologies, but what I can say, as part of the South Acton regeneration, there is a significant youth provision on that site. There's a youth centre that has been handed to the council, and it has a significant dowry in order for it to be sustainable for the longer term. And there's also income streams in terms of flexible workspace as part of that the money is then reinvested. So I think under the right model, you can get these things to work. So I don't understand why in Southall there shouldn't be youth provision when you can have that as part of a regeneration at South Acton. I don't know the answer to that one, but I know that you can make it work.
All right, we've got so many questions. Reverend Mark, I'm going to take three at a time. Reverend Mark, Councillor Joanna, and Laura, in that order.
Thank you, Lord Woolley. I'm going to be cheeky and ask two questions. They are interlinked. First of all, to Percy, thank you so much for your candour in talking about the fact that you think that there is more that can be done. Given that there's not clearly a lack of will, I'm just wondering what's been stopping you from doing more. Has it been a lack of incentive? And linked with that to Chief Executive Paul Najaric, I'm just wondering whether, given the huge amount of money being spent on regeneration, whether looking at diversity and inclusion records of companies is a precondition of awarding contracts. And if it's not, why isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, I'll respond to the first part of that as best as I can, Mark. I think historically, with regard to recruitment, I think we've probably we've waited for candidates to come to us via the usual channels of recruiters, the education system. And I think actually it's looking at it a different way and looking at actually at the grassroots level, and actually what are the issues with people from certain backgrounds getting into the industry, and that's raising awareness of it so that people are aware of what opportunities there are there, and then actually getting involved with programs for training, apprenticeships and everything else. So next month we've opened up there'll be an apprenticeship training program that's opened up at Countryside on a national basis, but that is to open the door for people to come into the industry, not just from a site-based traditional apprenticeship basis. It's actually kind of more the opportunity for people that wouldn't typically get into that industry to work for a QS or an architectural background. So I mean, we're trying to now unpick that, but I think in the past it's because we've previously relied on traditional routes of people coming through higher education and then being placed to us by our recruitment network, and that has taken time to unpick. And there is active work ongoing at the moment to try and address that. It wasn't a case of us avoiding it or anything else, but I think everything that's happened in the last year has seen an acceleration of trying to make a real change in some of these areas. And it's not just in this, it's, the way in which people are engaging with work, full stop, I think, has completely changed across the board. And, it's a bit of catch up, I think Lord Simon noted at the start of this in terms of my contribution.
Thank you very much. And as Kickstart, have you been able to take advantage of Kickstart as a process for apprenticeships and other?
Yeah, we are
industry.
We are supporting Kickstart at the moment. We've got a pilot scheme running. Unfortunately, it's not in Ealing. Within the wider group, it's in one of our manufacturing plants. But on the basis of the success of that we're hoping, we're going to roll that out on a wider basis. And as and when we can bring that to Ealing and engage with it, we will do. But we are engaged at a wider group level. We are engaged with the Kickstart program.
All right. Who was next? I've lost my thread. But I did see Edmund and Laura. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I think that Councillor Joanna was actually before me, but I will go ahead. So my question is probably best posed to Paul Najeric, but anyone can feel free to answer the question if it applies to them. So I feel like the council and businesses really make a point to focus on places like Acton and Ealing Broadway, when perhaps forgetting that Ealing as a council is quite large. There are areas such as Northolt, Greenford, Perivale, and Southall, which are perhaps forgotten in terms of the fact that people need support for employment and people need access to community centres. So, for example, 2 community centres in Northolt West End are closing, and that means that in terms of young people, there's nowhere for them to go, nowhere for them to be directed and supported with employment and any other matters that they need support with. And that also applies to older people. So I'm just wondering, what steps are the council and also businesses taking to engage other areas of the council and support people in the community with income, employment, and also just generally trying to get back into the workplace and trying to engage them?
Hold that thought. Hold that thought, Paul, and let me bring in Councillor Joanna, please. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Lord Woolley. I have a slightly different question. I think we've talked tonight, we've heard tonight about job readiness. My question is focused on the ethnicity income gap for those who are in employment. And essentially it's a question to all attendees tonight who employ residents in the borough. And that is, we've heard, I think, acknowledgement from most of you that more needs to be done to help employees from an ethnic minority background to move up into senior roles. But can you tell us how you're planning to show progress? For example, have you given consideration to publishing an ethnicity pay gap report similar to the gender pay gap report, so that public confidence can be built in the measures that you say you're putting in place? Thank you.
Let's start with that question first, to all our big employers. Paul.
Yes, Simon. So the short answer to Councillor Comedy-Rothwell is yes. We are absolutely looking at the ethnicity pay gap data in the council. Simon, do you want me to pick up the earlier point as well? Or would you rather I came back?
Please, whilst you're on the floor.
Yeah. So there was a question about, do we look at inclusivity and diversity in contracts? And absolutely, there's a legal provision called the Social Value Act, which is the sort of framework that enables us to do that. So we constantly look at our current relationships with contractors to make sure we work with progressive contractors, and we build that into future procurement. Couple of examples: we just created a council company for delivery of waste management, and we're making sure all the staff there are paid the London living wage. And that is a very diverse workforce, as you probably can imagine. And we're doing exactly the same thing with our school catering contract currently. So we do constantly look at that, and clearly we're upping our game in this area because of the issues that this call is highlighting. And the second point, which is very, very powerful by the Commissioner, is the point around Ealing is not one big place. It is several places with distinct needs. We increasingly, Commissioners, think about the 7 towns that we have in Ealing, and we analyse data about deprivation in those different towns, and we try and tackle the issues that they have. And we try to make sure that the investment that we make in those communities is proportionate to the issues that they're facing. But that's a very rich area, Simon. So, you know, we could easily drill down into particular areas, which I'm happy to do whenever.
How can the borough then justify closing 3 community centres?
I'm certainly not here telling you we can justify closing 3 community centres. We sustain a lot of community centres. We run a few ourselves, but largely they're provided in the community and voluntary sector. So absolutely happy to take away any further conversations about any of the voluntary sector community centres that are in trouble, Simon, to see what we can do.
Thank you. I want to keep on the ethnic minority pay gap reporting with our employers. Sarah, are you monitoring? How does it look?
We are indeed. So in the NHS, we have the workforce race equality standard, and we monitor ourselves against that, and we're set improvement targets year on year. We are making progress. We're meeting our milestone steps, if you see what I mean. But as I said, within our organisation, it is fairly good. It is those very senior roles. As you can see, I'm in a very senior role. I'm white. So perhaps when I go, you never know, we can up that.
Pitu and Percy.
If I'm honest, I don't know quite how we are going to measure progress in our diversity inclusion strategy, because I haven't seen the published report yet. So there will have to be some measurable standards in there to understand how we are moving forward, whether that includes clear definitions around pay gaps. I honestly haven't got an answer on that yet. So that might be something that we have to pick up in a future forum if we have the opportunity. So apologies.
I think that's going to be important. I would think it's going to be important for residents and partners. And I know people will be lobbying Paul when they have these business partners that come into the borough on testing them, how serious are they? I mean, a lot of companies talk about D&I. And then when you drill down, race doesn't come into it in a significant way. And I think that in this reset space, that there'll be a demand that changes. But Pitu and then Jason. But you'll have to unmute yourself first, my brother.
In the Park Royal region, we have a lot of airline companies or suppliers to airline companies who provide meals, and they, on driving past or looking at general people arriving for work, there is a lot of ethnic workforce there. But I need to go back to the office at West London Business and pull out some of this data to see what is the proportion of ethnicity in these companies in the Park Royal West London region, and what is the pay gap difference. And I think this is again opening up another door within WLB, and I think it'll be really, really productive, because it'll be nice to have this conversation with some of the large businesses, McVitie's being one of the larger businesses in Park Royal, and we all have a McVitie's biscuit now and again with our coffee. So it'll be good to see what is the pay gap and what is the proportion of ethnicity within their workforce at the Park Royal Hub. So I'm definitely going to take this up further.
Thank you very much. Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Joanna. We are publishing the ethnicity pay gap this year. The intention on launching that or publishing it will be the launch of a Closing the Gap action plan, which will be a multi-year plan to set out a number of interventions to enhance representation at more senior levels. So there'll be a number of things that sit within there. And one of the things that will sit within there is around taking positive action. There may be other things around procurement. So with regards to new contracts, there'll be a requirement for a level of diversity, but also potentially moving away from things like the external view of graduate training schemes. So they must come from Russell Group universities, when we know that within our organization at the lowest level, as I say, we've got 46, well, in fact, within security, we have 52% of Black, Asian, minority ethnics across security. Now, the stats say that Black, Asian, and minority ethnics are more likely to go to university than their white counterparts.
Right.
The chances are the talent exists within that 52%. So the CEO is really passionate about tapping into that talent, setting out some pathways and allowing them to progress within the organization. And that's one of the key things that we're going to do. In addition to that, as I say, yes, there'll be the piece around graduates, so we will still be bringing some more in, but there is a focus around race when it comes to bringing in graduates, and then also how we employ senior leaders within the organization. So we can't do it in the same way we've always done it.
Thank you. When you get animated, Jason, we lose you. The sound crackles. It must be that it gets a bit excited, but that's pretty clear. Did somebody's question not get answered? No. If not, then I'm going to move to Mohan and Edmund, please. The floor is yours.
I just want to check in the context of Park Royal and generally self-employment. Whilst we'll be able to, obviously a lot of people can be deployed, or to some extent they can be deployed in terms of Heathrow, maybe priority being given to previous workers being made redundant, etc., etc. But there would be a significant number of people who would seek self-employment to be able to feed their families. And I'm just wondering if there is a self-employment strategy in terms of assisting people who will get left out in the recovery. Kind of business formation, self-employment with a focus on certain areas.
Okay. And Edmund, and then Laura wants the council to answer why it's doing or not doing something or other. I'll have a look in a minute. But Edmund, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Paul, and it's in regards of the unemployment and the way it's going to affect communities in Ealing. We know the employment intersects with other areas of life, well-being, housing, and the related things, family relationship as well. And my question particularly is in terms of housing, because that's one of the highest drain of income in families, and therefore when employment is affected, it's likely that housing is going to be affected, and then people would need to resort to the council for help. Now we've seen that over time there seems to be a high rate of gatekeeping where people are turned down at the first asking for help for housing, and then you would then need further interventions and representations to be able to get people, to qualify. What assurance can you give this commission that when people approach the council for help, they will get that help at the first instance? And another thing that we've seen is that there is a tendency to push people out of the local area, and a way of just washing them off the council responsibility and farming them to other people. What assurances would you give us that people will get that help and the gatekeeping?
Let me put the housing both to Percy and Paul. And before you answer, Paul, you'll be probably acutely aware, but Percy too, that when it comes to poor housing, I looked at some data about damp housing, and think about dampness with children and how shocking that can be. That if you're Black and I think it's Caribbean, you're 13% Black Caribbeans live in damp housing, 13. The national average is is 3%, African 10%, Pakistani 9%. So our communities are really subject to poorer housing. And then to add to Edmund's point about access, and this is to press a little bit that your housing, particularly the collaboration with the council, is that being equitably dispensed? Are some people, I mean, do you have any figures on that? And then to you, Paul, I mean, you know, this is majorly on your doorstep. That are you, what are the challenges that you see, and how can you ensure that it's equitably dealt with? Paul first, then Percy.
Thanks for the question, Edmund. So I'll try and be brief. There's 3 chunks to this, I think. Chunk 1 is how can we prevent people getting into difficult circumstances with their housing. Chunk 2 is how can we make sure there is more genuinely affordable homes in the borough for local people to to live in. Chunk 3 is what can we do about the quality of the private sector dwelling in the borough. I think those are the 3 elements. So one of the challenges, Simon, in all of this, whenever we talk about the millions and the thousands of everything, I think what we are currently investing as a society and as a country in some of these problems doesn't do justice to the scale of these problems. And I just want to be open about that. I'm not, I don't want to hide that. But so we do a tremendous amount of work to try and prevent homelessness, and it runs to the tunes of working with thousands of families a year, Edmund. And we're often successful, but we're not always successful. Point 2, I think I mentioned earlier, we're building 2,500 new genuinely affordable, effectively council homes at the moment. Now, I'm very proud of that, and I think our community is proud of that, but it's a start. It doesn't solve this problem, because we've had 20, 30, 40 years where this has been an issue. And in relation to the private sector, COVID has reminded us about the conditions that some people live in. Sometimes multi-generational, sometimes houses of multiple occupancy that shouldn't be houses of multiple occupancy. We're developing, we've had a licensing scheme for local landlords for a number of years in Ealing. Councillor Camadou Rothwell's been very important in that work. And we're developing that still further at the moment to really try and drive up the quality of what's happening in the private sector and so drive out some of these poor practices. Thanks, Simon.
Percy.
Listen, I think there was a question, or part of the question was about the quality of the housing that some people are having to tolerate. And one of the key things that, as part of the regeneration programme at South Acton, it is because the housing that is existing there as part of the estate is beyond its sell-by date. It is, we appreciate the fact that it's some people's much loved homes, but they're not appropriate accommodation. So everything that we're replacing there with is suitably insulated, high quality, it's built to last. So that deals with part of the problem. I think the wider question about accessibility and is it equitable? So the whole estate there is the wider planning permission for the 3.5, more than that, 1,000 homes. 50% of that is affordable. And then within that 50%, 80% of that is rented, so social rented, traditional council housing product. The other 20% is an intermediate product, so shared ownership to give people a foot up on the housing ladder. But in reality, what's of interest for most people is the 80%, and the priority there is when that's provided and when it's delivered, it is initially for the existing residents there, for somewhere to move. They've gone through the upheaval of losing their home, so they should have the ability to move to a new home in their neighbourhood. Yeah. But then, the rest of it is to deal with people that are on registers for housing and are in housing need, and that's who is eligible for that housing, and that's who it's provided for. And we work with our regeneration partners at the council and L&Q to manage that process. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot of suspicion about what means affordable, I think, for a lot of people, but it is 50% of genuinely affordable homes on that site for the community.
Thank you for that, Paul. I just want to make clear that we're not double counting here. That when you were doing 3,500 and 1,000 or 50% are in effect council houses, is that part of your count, Paul?
So it probably covers slightly different time periods, Simon, to be honest.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's some overlap, but not entirely.
All right. Okay. And I wanted Moan's question about, and I think it's a really important one, because there'll be a number of jobs that won't come back, and I want to ask, what is that space for the new entrepreneurs to come forward and be job creators of themselves? And now I think I would ask Jason and Pitu, because you're our business fraternity here. How are you creating that space for new entrepreneurs to come through?
Shall I go first?
Please, yeah.
So I think for us, we've set out Heathrow's local recovery plan, and we launched that in November 2020. And it covers 4 key themes. One's around skills and employment, the other one's around supply chain, you've got a green recovery piece, and the final part is around surface access. And I think this thing around entrepreneurs sits very much within the supply chain. So what we're doing in under this local recovery plan is we're promoting and supporting SMEs from the community and offering them an improved opportunity to work with Heathrow, either directly or as a subcontractor, as we build back better. So that's one of the kind of real areas of focus where we can support new businesses and entrepreneurs as a kind of setting out on their new journey. So there are opportunities, regardless of the size that you are, there are opportunities to work with Heathrow.
So under the WLB and PRBG remit, we are supported by the Old Oak North Development, and under the HS2, there are some HS2 network, there are some 200 businesses which are involved up and down the train line, supporting business, creating employment, of every kind, so be it in construction or be it in supply chains to various parts of the train network. This is happening, but if I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly, again, the ethnicity point within these 200 companies who are creating new jobs linked directly to HS2.
Thank you very much. There was a question about when these jobs come about, where are they advertised, how are they advertised? Are they cascading down enough? And of course, with Percy, with Kickstart, that's an opportunity. I do have some reservations about Kickstarter and whether or not it'll be long enough, whether it links in with apprentices in a meaningful way. But I think it's a starting point, and we have to try and build upon that. We could go on until 8 o'clock and longer. Because in many ways, we've had a number of discussions on this commission, but this is a very, very key element of it. And what we're trying to do with this is lay bare the challenges, have some solutions, but the real goal for us commissioners is to set out Ealing as a beacon that understands the huge challenges, brings in all facets of our community. We don't want to build back better. I know you said that, Jason, and I know we want to build new better. That's our mantra with this commission. But we need you for these honest discussions. We've got a few minutes left. I'm going to hold our guests for a few minutes longer, just in case there's any more burning questions. And then I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, because she often gives a wonderful bird's eye view of the conversation and where any gaps that I may have missed, So before I hand over to her, is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who I've missed out? There was a question in the chat, Paul, about a member of the public saying that it's not acceptable that so many community centres have closed, and we need to confront that. So then maybe that's one to take away. But I can see Callum's hand up. And so other than Callum, speak now or forever hold your. Callum, the floor is yours.
Thanks, thank you. I think it's been really fruitful discussion and really rich, and I certainly have, gained a much better understanding of what different private and not-for-profit sectors are doing. I guess my only question to all kind of our external guests, really, with probably the exception of Paul, is at some point we'll have to make recommendations about how to improve employment and income outcomes for BAME people in Ealing. And I'd just be really interested if you had one thing that that you would advise us to put in as a recommendation, what would they be? Thank you.
That's a great question. And look, before you answer, there's no wrong answer. And as far as we're concerned, the bolder you are, the braver you are, the better we all are. So, what do you think that we shouldn't ignore as we start to pull together some ideas for Ealing being this beacon? Jason.
I'd like to come in on that one then, if that's okay. There's lots of recommendations, but one that's particularly relevant to the area we work in is that there's multi-million-pound government contracts that works to support unemployed people in Ealing, and I think the Commission should look at how that's being delivered in the borough. To what extent are the prime contractors who win these contracts engaging local voluntary groups who are those people who are engaging with Black and ethnic minority people on the ground? To what extent are they including them in their supply chain? So you've got organisations that have been in Ealing for years and years and years. Are they getting access to some of the funding that comes through these major contracts? Or is it mainly going to very, very large national companies where there isn't a lot of local engagement?
Okay, thank you. There was several questions to that one question, but we'll accept that. Jason.
So I guess thinking about moving away from, if you think about pre-COVID, the organic employment and involvement of Black, Asian, minority ethnics, moving away from that, and kind of as John just touched on, being more intentional from a council perspective, that any major contracts must have a certain level of representation. As I say, with Heathrow, the focus is 40% based on our local community, 40% must be from Black, Asian, minority ethnics at all levels of the organisation. That is the target. And so just being more intentional about that.
Thank you, Jason. Percy.
I think from my perspective, and
if you're not speaking, put yourself on mute. I will come to you, Janpal.
I think it's improving the transparency of the opportunities that are there in construction. And I know I'm very much talking about construction here, and I think that is raising awareness primarily at school and college levels about both the more site-based but then professional opportunities that are available. I just don't. That lack of people coming through into the industry at a very, very young and sort of base level just isn't there. So I think that's where I think the focus should go from almost a very selfish point of view, to get the right talent coming into the industry, if I'm honest. So that's my view.
Thank you, Percy. Janpal.
So I'm going to be cheeky. I want to say two things. I mean, the first thing is I think that a lot of the interventions that we've discussed today might be ad hoc. And so I think we need to consider longer term. Getting people into jobs means we need to create local regeneration partnerships with some of the players around in this meeting today. So that's the long-term solution. The small thing is I think we need, a bit as John has said, we need to seriously encourage those largely funded organizations and providers nationally to bend their priorities and listen to what we want on the ground. At the moment, we're given a menu which could be applied in Bristol, in Exeter, it could be anywhere. And we need locally based, locally driven solutions. And one of the things that I'm keen on is that given the excellence of the schools that we have in this borough and the turnout that they're providing of really well-educated kids who don't actually have good prospects because for one reason or another, they're not enabled to. Let's make the providers offer high quality, well-paid job opportunities to our kids. And it's a question of bending their priorities to our needs.
Thank you, Janpal. So Paul, you're getting the last word from our guests before I hand over to Councillor Joanna. If you can keep it brief.
Sorry, was that to me, Simon? Yeah. So I think Callum wasn't that suggested I didn't contribute on this one, but I'll give my 2 pence, which is I think there's no substitute for decent, well-paid work and dignified work. So I do wonder about commitment from partners around London Living Wage, recognition, and how contracts work in employment. I think that's a space we should, the Commission would really do well to think about. Thank you.
Well, I think we will be thinking about contract compliance and procurement, and with the hundreds of millions of pounds that you spend and the billionaire partners that would like to work in the borough, then we need to lean into that a little bit more, I would think. But Councillor Joanna, can you see any gaps or your bird's eye view thoughts of the last 2 hours?
Thank you, Lord Woolley. I would say that I think it's been an extremely thorough and insightful discussion this evening. As we've heard, the disparities in ethnicity, income and employment existed before the pandemic. And of course, without any intervention, COVID-19 looks set to embed that further. So it's been really timely and great to have this conversation tonight and to hear from all the organisations who have attended that there is an acknowledgement of the need to support our residents and ethnic minority communities in terms of upskilling and supporting with job readiness, but also with ensuring that internally processes are in place to help our residents from an ethnic minority background progress to those senior roles and to close that income pay gap that is often experienced. But I think personally, and I'm sure commissioners will agree, it's been especially interesting and illuminating to hear about the wider factors that impact on income inequality for our ethnic minority communities that have been raised tonight. And great thanks to John and Janpal for that, particularly around digital exclusion and regeneration. And I'm sure that these are points that the commissioners will pick up for further consideration. And as we look at other themes that impact on income and employment as well, such as education, which will be in our next section. Yeah. So overall, I think the gaps that may have existed have been picked up by our attendees tonight. So thank you. And the only thing to say is, of course, we can only know as much as we're told. So as always, just a call out to any residents watching to please share your experiences. If you work in the borough, do let us know if you feel you are experiencing any challenges or barriers to progression. And the Commission will review this and ensure that it informs our analysis of what we need to do to ensure greater equality in ethnic income and employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Joanna. Can I thank all our guests this evening, those present and not present: Angela, Janpal, Dr. John Blackmore, David Warnes, Jason Knight, Orvi Patel, Harpet, Percy, Paul, and Sarah. It's been a really excellent session. I've been told and reliably told that there's still a bit of blue sky. So just, if you want to quickly go out and get a bit of vitamin D, it's still there. But this has really been important, and we've got to try and make sense of it. But, you know, this is not time wasted. This is precious. You've given us lots of gems, some of which we've got to polish, put together, and the mixing metaphors. We want to be that beacon, but we can't be it without you. So can we thank our guests, please, for taking time away from their families? Can I thank the Ealing staff? We had a few technical problems, but we always do. You're super brilliant, super patient. And can I thank my fellow commissioners for your insight and expertise that make me chairing this extremely special. I don't know when our next meeting is. It's probably in next month. So next month sometime, and we'll have to do some preparatory work for that. But I wish you a good evening, good health, and I'll see you all soon.